Earlier this week, it was announced that Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others, including Rashida Tlaib, Mark Pocan, were going to try to stop the sale of about $735 million worth of JDAMs and small diameter bombs to Israel. But that was not going to be enough to stop it. It would require, within one day, a senator to step up and do that. And I'm sure basically everyone watching this now knows that Bernie Sanders is that senator. We've got all the details, but before we get to it, I want to ask Cenk, did you think he was going to do it? I wasn't sure.
No, I had it at 50-50. So first, let me announce, this is an announcement. Bernie Sanders, an American hero. So lately I've had some disagreements with Bernie Sanders' legislative strategy, such as it is, right? But that doesn't mean that his heart isn't in the right place, and that doesn't mean that his policies are across the board still fantastic. But here's a case where he went beyond having great policies and took bold action. Now, is this likely to pass? No, and so it's not quite as bold as the $15 minimum wage, because if they fought for that one, that could have passed, and it would have made a lot of Democrats uncomfortable. Still, this one is a little bit more, it puts some people in discomfort, but overall, since it's not likely to pass, it's not as controversial. But I'm giving you a needless caveat here. On this issue, Bernie is fantastic and made the right decision. But I'll go a little further. Look, John and I in the last segment talked about how in American media and politics, there's been this absurd thing of you're either pro-Israel or anti-Israel. So that creates a shield and a weapon for the Israeli right wing to do what they're doing, and then hide behind being that anybody that disagrees is against their entire country, right? And it's a proxy for calling people anti-Semitic, which makes no sense because, well, what if we agree with a left-wing position that Israel has, right? But it was used very, very effectively in this country for decades. And if we're being honest, it needed a Jewish leader to break through, to go, no, that's absurd, and I'm not gonna stand for it. And if they're not going to do the right things, I'm going to stand up to the government, to the right-wing government of Israel, as I stand up to the government of America when they do the wrong things, and especially when it's the right-wing government. So it took tremendous courage to lead on that, and I was hoping that he would. And given what he said in the last 5 years about Palestinians and this issue overall, I was hopeful that he was going to do it, and he did. And it makes a giant difference. Because even if this bill doesn't pass, this resolution, we've now actually have a conversation for the first time in my lifetime in America. Hey, is the government of Israel doing the right thing or the wrong thing? And you're actually allowed to have that conversation. And yes, as I predicted in the 2020 run, absurd right-wing backers of the Netanyahu government called Bernie Sanders, who's Jewish, and perhaps the most successful Jewish politician in American history, they called him anti-Semitic. Why? Because they only had one trick. They were one-trick ponies, so they used a trick, and it was. I said they would do it, even as absurd as it was, and they did do it, right? So my guess is they'll double down on that one-trick pony because that's all they got, right?
Definitely.
But for most people, you can see that was not that hard, right? Like the corporate media in this country. Again, there's a lot of folks that do this, right? But Sean Hannity and Jake Tapper just did it in like the last 24 hours. Their propaganda in favor of the right-wing version of the Israeli government is so overwhelming that it makes it nearly impossible to even have a rational conversation about Israeli policies, right? And this is Bernie saying, hell no, we're gonna have a real conversation. And if it comes down to it, no, the US support of your military is not at all guaranteed. I've never seen that before. And Jake Tapper and Sean Hannity can say all the nonsense they want. For most people, they see Bernie doing it and they're like, no, we're not, no, you guys are ridiculous. Obviously Bernie's not anti-Semitic, and half the people that are backing this are Jewish politicians. Obviously they're not anti-Semitic, you guys are being absurd. No, we're gonna have an actual conversation about this issue.
Yeah, and while I totally agree, there's been some insane media coverage, there is also, thankfully, a little bit more balance. And by balance, I don't mean accepting some equal left-wing absurd view, but like talking to Palestinians, it's a novel concept. They've like dipped their toe in that pool this time around. You've seen viral footage of the buildings going down. There was the young girl Nadine, her video that went viral. Like we've got that, which we didn't have in 2014 nearly as much and in past conflicts. But I want to give you a little bit more details about what Bernie is doing, for which I agree he's going to be attacked viciously. So he has the resolution. There's going to be now a guaranteed vote on it. It would require a simple majority to pass the Senate. Good luck on that. If it were to be vetoed by President Joe Biden after that, it would need a 2/3 majority in both chambers. So a joint resolution of disapproval like this has never been successfully used to stop an arms sale. In fact, multiple times under Donald Trump, attempts that were successful in Congress to stop him from selling weapons to Saudi Arabia and I believe the UAE were vetoed by Donald Trump. But they did try. It's becoming a little bit more common, and it's good to see that the same sort of tactic that can be used to try to stop some of the wanton murder of civilians by countries like Saudi Arabia can also be deployed when Israel is doing similar things. So that is all good. I want to read just a little bit of what Bernie Sanders had to say about this. He said, at a moment when US-made bombs are devastating Gaza, and by the way, these are the ones that we're about to sell them are the same ones that are being used right now. So it's already a little bit locked in. At a time when they're devastating Gaza and killing women and children, we cannot simply let another huge arms sale go through without even a congressional debate. I believe that the United States must help lead the way to a peaceful and prosperous future for both Israelis and Palestinians. We need to take a hard look at whether the sale of these weapons is actually helping do that or whether it is simply fueling conflict. And I mean, I think we both know how this is likely to end up, but I agree, it has at least now maybe indicated to a few other politicians that like, you can do this. I mean, if Bernie can do it, you can potentially do what we all know is the moral thing to do. And maybe it will, if not stop arms sales like this or the billions of dollars of military aid per year, maybe at least we could get some conditions on them, some sort of considerations for human rights, the lives of civilians, those sorts of things.
So last two things here. First, now giving credit to Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and others, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It turns out diversity and representation makes a difference because before there were no Muslims in Congress, then we had Keith Ellison, Andre Carson, then Tlaib and Omar. And Tlaib and Omar have been much more vocal than their predecessors, and they're proudly Muslim. And so they come out and they say, and Tlaib is Palestinian, and they say, what do you want me to speak out against my own people? I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna support Palestinians not because they're better, not because no one is guilty in this. There are no guilty Palestinians. No, Hamas does fire rockets, etc. But and Omar's called that out. She's called out the human rights abuses of Israel and Hamas, right? And I just point to her because AIPAC is attacking her with smears, as always. Right-wing, awful lobbyist group in America, and so. But that diversity and representation made a difference because their voices were heard for the first time, and then the rest of a lot of the Just Democrats joined in. AOC, Ayanna Pressley had a wonderful speech. Cori Bush, etc. Look at that, Just Democrats make a difference, right? But if it was just them, it would not have had as much of an impact as when Bernie Sanders joins the fight and others in the Senate, and it becomes a broader movement. And so that's why we're giving Bernie so much credit here that he deserves. But I want to give credit to one other person and then generally. Look, a long time ago I said that I think that the only way that the Israeli-Palestinian issue gets resolved is if and when, I really believe that it was gonna happen, I still believe it's gonna happen. American Jewish population says that's it, we've had enough. And we've got to make the right-wing government of Israel stop. Otherwise, there's going to be no check on this. Because why does Israel act in the vicious way that it does recently? Because power always corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We all know this. It has nothing to do with anything other than the power structure, right? And so, why do they have absolute power? Because America backs them 100%. It doesn't matter if the entire rest of the world is united in condemning any particular action or policy or war of Israel, right? Or a war crime or anything like that. It doesn't matter, China, Russia, everybody can agree, as long as US is backing Israel, they have absolute power in that dynamic, okay? And that is going to, by nature, corrupt Israel. There's no question about it. The only way that things could turn around is if American Jews stood up and said, no, don't stop calling people anti-Semitic, stop pretending that this is anti-Israel when we're all trying to help Israel be better, right? And they have, I think I was right, okay? And so when I said that, I don't know, a decade ago or so, people say, oh, you're hopelessly naive. Now, by the way, why did some good people say that? Because in the old guard in this country remembers the bad old days when the Jews across the world were beleaguered and victimized in literally historic proportions. And they said, right wing, left wing government of Israel, I don't care, right? Israel must be protected at all costs. And is there an old guard like that here in America? Yes, of course there is. And I understand their loyalties, and I don't mean to question their loyalties to America as well. Don't get me wrong, I just get that. I know, I'm from the old country, right? I know Turks that still love Turkey, even though they're 100% American. And I know that this oftentimes they get biased by that, right? And they can't see straight. But I suspected that there would be young Jews in America who are, in total, very progressive, not just young, but remember, Jewish Americans are the second most loyal group to the Democratic Party after African Americans. 70% on average vote for Democrats. So they're actually very progressive overall. So there's so many misconceptions in the media, that's why I want to clear it up. And so, as I suspected, those young progressive Jews now leading many different Jewish American groups and now in power have risen up and said, no, this isn't right. And we're gonna do the right thing. And I think it's having a giant impact. And so I tell you all of that in prelude to telling you, again, as I told you, it's not just Bernie Sanders. There's a lot of Jewish legislators that were leading on this, including John Ossoff. So I didn't even know he was Jewish, but it turns out, it turns out he is. And he was the one that led the letter saying, right now, ceasefire, right now, okay? So, and remember how Jewish Americans stood up for Muslims during the Muslim ban under the Trump years. And the Anti-Defamation League was wonderful in that fight. See, now this is what America looks like. When Jews, Muslims, Christians, atheists, etc., we all get together and we decide what's a rational policy, get beyond the old biases, and work together for truth and justice. That's what I love, and that's what I saw with Bernie Sanders' effort, and that's why I don't think it's hyperbole to say he's an American hero for this. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.